Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second session on the causal pathways evaluations. Our topic today is about values-driven rigor and quality. So I'm getting to the slide there. So similar to last week, today's session lays the essential groundwork for the journey that we begin through the causal pathways initiatives. This initiative exists to make visible what often feels like a black box in philanthropy and systems change work. This is intended to help us collectively to see how systems are or are not changing. We are a part of international learning community, evaluators, strategists, funders, and change makers who are at this point grappling one core challenges in our work, which is how do we understand what's actually contributing to change in complex dynamic systems? This module is about building set understanding of what causal pathways are and why are they matter and what it takes to be truly ready to explore them. In many ways, today is our collective pause before the deep dive. It's where we begin to challenge our assumptions, surfacing the myths, and think more critically about how change really unfolds, not just in theory, but also in practice. What we explore together today will set the stage for the rigor and values that we'll unpack in this module 2 today, and the design and implementation strategies we'll put into motion in module 3 in 2 weeks' time. So let's begin today with by grounding ourselves in both the mindset and the muscles, and we'll need to make the most of this approach. So my name is Yulianto Dewata. I'm based in Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm an evaluator and have been working in several various development projects in Indonesia. Today, I'm partnering with Jeff. Jeff, probably you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jeff Mathias. I'm an Indian New Zealander. I live in New Zealand now. I'm a vegetarian and I hunt. I eat what I hunt, but I don't eat any other meat. I was once an emergency doctor. Now I'm a full-time evaluator. I love complexity. That's probably why I'm not a doctor anymore. It's not complex enough. And yeah, you'll get to know me a little bit from the case I present. Thanks, Yulianto.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Now continue. Our colleague Carolina will put out the poll. So you will see in a few seconds coming up on your screens. We have 3 questions. Please spare time to fill the information. So to get the most of our causal pathways efforts today requires that everyone involved has some understanding of the approach in order to get the most from the process as possible. Causal pathways work isn't just an evaluation approach, it's a powerful strategy tool, and we have seen it work effectively as an ongoing evaluative tool in adaptive system-focused change strategies. We have seen it work well with active participation by people in the system, even children involved in the participatory system change work. Causal pathways work is also a journey that many are just beginning. I know from my own journey, it requires giving up some of my assumptions about how evaluation tell causal stories, about whether our traditional approaches that capture strategies, outcomes, and descriptions of context are truly making sense of causality amid complexity. We have the result. Okay. We have non-profit evaluators, non-profit leaders. Welcome. So, it's a mix. We have participants new to causal pathways evaluations, and the other participants at some point have learned about causal pathways, but haven't conducted one. All right, awesome. So we'll continue. Today, this is our agenda and the learning objectives. Our focus is mainly to build knowledge on how to use a values-driven approach to strengthen quality and rigor in causal pathways evaluations. For those who did not attend the last session, you probably might find this training has a bit of the gap. We are not going deep into what causal pathways really is. You may also want to attend the next session, as we are not as focused on the step-by-step of designing causal pathways evaluation today. We will talk instead about rigor and quality through a value-driven approach specific to causal pathways evaluations. We'd like to set 3 points as we get started. The first one is we are constantly improving the trainings that we are offering. We would welcome your feedback on this training at the end. And we will have time for question and answer at the end. Please put questions you have in the chat and holding them until our Q&A sessions. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can. And then if not, we will try to follow up via email after the sessions. The materials from today will be available after the session. You don't need to take notes or screenshot. We will share the slides in a few days' time. In this training, we are driving into how we can define rigor and ensure quality in the causal pathways evaluations. The dominant model of rigor based on internal validity, control, and replicability originated from the experimental research traditions. System change work where there is change in the dynamic, multi-actor, and context sensitive. We believe that values must lead rigor if we want credible, useful evaluation in a complex setting. In our experience, redefining rigor is not new. There have been conversations for years about how to rethink rigor to match the complexity of the context we all work in. Evaluation is about making value adjustments. Values are at the core of the work. Many different efforts are being made to unpack our own values by redefining rigor. Today's training specifically draws on our experiences as evaluators and on the Causal Pathways Initiative's rigor guidance recently completed and available on the CPI website. The rigor guidance is deeply informed by a large, collaboratively designed alternative way of understanding rigor. It's called the Inclusive Rigor Framework. CPI developed this guidance because we recognize the high quality, rigorous causal studies have specific characteristics and benefit from specific tools, particularly given the complexity of making causal pathways visible from many different perspectives. We're going to begin by discussing about 2 critical evaluator practices, then move into what a values-driven evaluation looks like. You'll have time to talk in small groups and unpack what you're learning. From there, we'll talk about participatory and inclusive practices specific to how they help with causal pathways rigor and quality, and finish up by exploring rubrics and how they play a particularly important and unique role when making causal claims. You'll have another opportunity at that point to explore what this means for your work. Check this, check. Okay. As mentioned earlier, values are at the core of our work. Our values inform our areas of curiosity, the questions we ask, how we seek to explore those questions, the approaches and methods we choose to use to do so, and the data sources we deem important. Our values inform who is included as an evaluation decision maker involved in determining our evaluation scope, questions, design, and implementation. They also influence the perspective we bring and the practices we employ as evaluator. The values-driven evaluation asks not just what works, but what matters, for whom, and over what period. This approach doesn't dilute rigor. It even redefines it in ways that are more legitimate, ethical, and fit for purpose. This framing has a particular relevance in philanthropic and system change contexts, where learning and legitimacy often matter more than the external attribution. This is not just a technical choice, it's a political and ethical one too. Values and principle-driven evaluation leads to evaluations that may reflect lived realities and system dynamics, usable insights for strategic refinement, alignment of evaluation practice with values of equity and justice, field-level learning on how system change happens, and evaluation that works for the evaluant. Now let's look. It's not moving. Now let's look in greater depth at the practices and values. First, a characteristic of causal pathways evaluation, its attention to our personal practices as evaluators as critical to ground and strengthen rigor and quality. There are two key practices that we bring as causal pathways evaluators. So let's unpack these two practices. The first one is reflexivity. It's understanding yourself and acting on that understanding. And the second one is credibility. It's doing things that increase your trustworthiness in others' eyes. It means that the context of causal pathways evaluation and why they are critical to operationalizing values. I'm going to hand over this for 20 seconds to you, Jeff.
Yeah, I just put this slide in actually mainly just to show off. I used to live there with the Himalayas behind me, and I'm running at 4,000 meters. No, this is from my website, and I put my values on my website, and it's a great place to start with an evaluation. A commissioner or a project says, would you consider evaluating? I say, have a look at my values. Let's start from there, and it grounds the evaluation in who I am, and then it's a very natural segue into saying, yeah, what's important for you? Tell me more about you. And I do this very relational thing, and it's so much more enjoyable to work that way. We'll get more into this later, but I just wanted to show a nice picture. Back to you.
Thank you.
Anton.
Thank you, Jeff. So the next slide is reflexivity as a practice. So this is more than just a self-awareness. It's an active, ongoing practice of interrogating how our own personality, perspective, and institutional roles influence every step of the evaluations. It also includes reflecting on how our methods and findings might be used or misused, and whether we are reinforcing a dominant narrative of making space for marginalized ones. So it's very important that you, as an evaluator, map your own position and potential biases, collectively reflect with participants and co-evaluators, as well as building reflexivity into analysis, not just during the process. Now, credibility as practice. Credibility in this context is not about meeting external gold standards of evidence, but about ensuring trustworthiness from the perspective of the users and those affected by the findings. Take assessments of value for money or cost benefits, for example. As much in traditional evaluation, credibility is often equated with objectivity. Those assessments often assume that value should be measured in short-term bias. For example, I was once talking with an official in Mongolia. He bought best practices training every year because the principle of the schools changed. So every year he had to do it again. From his standpoint in value for money or cost benefits, it was not really useful, as it did not consider the payoff of what the investment in the medium term. So therefore, it's important to recognize what makes the evidence credible will vary depending on the values and priorities of the evaluation stakeholders. So it's very important that we are able to articulate in explicit about causal pathways, what's the pathways to change the route, and paying attention to a range of outcomes and possible impacts, or probably the unintended ones, understanding the contextual variation of the situation, using an iterative break-college approach, drawing on a range of causal interference strategies, and also important having a dialogue with the stakeholders. All right, so I'll give it over to you, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, again, very quickly. I just Yulianto mentioned that word bricolage, which is French for mix and match, basically. This is a webinar that Michelle Gerard and I did earlier this year, presenting outcome harvesting with attitude change. Traditional outcome harvesting does not include attitudes. You get observable outcomes, behavior, but not attitudes. And particularly for things like peace, which Michelle's really into, attitudes are actually really important. So what we're doing here is presenting a kind of improvised evaluation methodology. We're not sticking to the true methodology. We're saying more important than the true methodology is an evaluation system that captures what's important. So the traditional approach is you force the evaluation into a methodological box, whereas what we're saying here is that a rigorous causal pathway evaluation puts values in alignment with the needs of the evaluation above methodology. So I just wanted to illustrate, and that was March this year that we did that. So we've got grounding and values through strength and rigor. Evaluation has the word value right in it. It's bring values out, evaluate, bring out the values. So values have to be important. Let's go through and next slide, Yulianto. Let's see what that really means. So there are quite a few values which could be. Here are three which in the causal pathways team we think are really important, and not every time, but they are very often should be right in there. We call these core values. Seeking equity. How do initiatives affect the different populations differently? What are they doing with the different populations? Are they spreading people out? Are they bringing them together? What happens with resources? Actually, is that an important question in this evaluation? It's not about methodology, it's about the value. What does this program really think? Learning and utilization. So it becomes a value to say, am I doing an evaluation that's actually can inform strategy, that funders, implementers, participants, and others infected by the intervention may be able to use it? We're saying that's a value. It's not just a principle. It's actually, that's what is important to us, and that's what may be important to a project. And you'll see this come out in the case example I'm about to present. And the third one here is perhaps the most interesting of all, embracing complexity. Lots of change that affects people's lives around the world comes in complex ways, multiple pathways, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's not A to B to C, holding up a test tube and knowing what happens. We need to explore the complexity in order to actually be able to give strategic advice to say to our partners or whoever we're evaluating with, say, actually, this may be the way to bring the change you guys dream of. And we will just talk about complexity a little bit more. Next slide, Yulianto. So when steering causal pathways initiative, complexity comes out as a value because it's incredibly important pretty much in all of the kinds of evaluations we do. Simple things like, did people get immunized? Even they're not that simple. And I'll tell you, I'll unpack this a little bit more, but I gave it as an example. Imagine you come from a different planet and you come to planet Earth, and the project all it's trying to do is to release tennis balls and see if they bounce. Now, some of you may, I'll talk about that in a second. Some of you, probably all of you, are quite familiar with the ideas of complexity, but let's just reground ourselves. In a traditional causal kind of approach, you might be thinking A causes B. If A happens, then A leads to B. And to give you a visual metaphor of that, you're saying if you put a circle with a black border around it into the system, a circle with a black border comes out somewhere else, and you're just saying, how does it come out? How does that work? Where does it come out? And you're thinking, you start off with circles with black borders and you finish with circles with black borders, and you're locked into that. And that's quite often what a theory of change gives us. You come to this a planet and you think, I know, tennis ball, you're going to drop it, it's going to bounce. All I'm looking is to see how high it bounces and how far it rolls away. It's all pretty straightforward and obvious. There are other people, on the other hand, who say every system is so incredibly complex and we can't even know, we can't predict. We don't know if we throw in a circle with a black border around it, maybe a purple star will come out, maybe nothing will come out, maybe a piece of shredded paper. We don't know. There's no way to know this. And for people like that, if you think of that, that's a kind of chaotic system where there's no relationship between input and output. That's very hard to do a causal pathways analysis because you're saying there's no way to trace a causal pathway. And what we're presenting here is a kind of middle ground. We're not scientists in a lab with test tubes, but we are people working with human beings in environments which we kind of know something about. They're not complete mysteries to us. We do know something about them. And our mindset is saying there's not a single simple answer to how it's going to happen. There are many different ways to, but yes, there is a relationship between input or what a project does or program does and what happens. There is a relationship and there is a way of getting some ideas, not a complete single answer, the test tube kind of thing, but it's not like there's no relationship whatsoever. And that's I think that's the kind of programs that we're all into. So we expect good outcomes to have a sort of partial continuity with the intervention. It might be in function, it might be in form, it might be in spirit. If it's a ethical intervention, it might be somewhere, but they embrace the way the interaction and other actors and elements of the local system, they're all kind of together and they all have different contributions. And we're saying we know that, we get that. Let's have a system where we can work with that. And imagine you're there on your new planet letting go of tennis balls. If you went in just with the theory of change, all you'd see is tennis balls bouncing and they bounce away. If you say I can't figure this out, you go away and say, I've got no advice for you. I don't know how those balls behave. If you look with a complexity lens, you might say, well, your theory of change is they bounce, but let's have a bit of a look here. What about the ones, they always go down. If you let them go, they always go down. What about the ones you released underwater? They go up. And then you say, well, let's take a couple back to the spaceship we arrived here on. And you let them go there and they don't go up or down. They stay in the same place. And some, even on the concrete where they should bounce, some don't bounce because they were cracked. And they bounce and they interact with each other. And an evaluation like that is a little bit harder to do, but it will give you some ideas about gravity, which you may be able to feed back to the project. Whereas I think the other two evaluations, you wouldn't really draw any big lessons about gravity. So that's what the tennis ball picture is all about. Next slide, Yolanta. Okay, so if we're into complexity, how do we do it? And it, as one of you is an evaluator, if you make choices all the time in evaluation, and each stage of the evaluation, and if you're a commissioner, you also expect your evaluator to make choices. You've got an idea of what you want them to do, and you're employing them because they're good at making choices. And we should make choices which honor complexity, honor that approach that it's not straightforward, but there is a causal pathway somewhere hidden in that gloopy spaghetti mess. There is actually a causal pathway. And maybe we allow conflicting points of view to be represented side by side. We don't go for the unique, even if that makes the findings less precise or definitive. And we're very clear about the boundaries of what we can or cannot learn. And for those of you guys who came to the first session, this idea of simultaneously thinking in structured ways, there's a causal chain, but also emergent ways. Something surprising happens. Prison warders amazingly start saying, "I love my prisoners." No one expected that. And yeah, you might want to probe the explanations in different ways. You don't just accept something, oh, A equals B, but you start probing with causal probes, as we call them. So complexity as a value, which is quite an unusual thing to say, entails letting go of the Western top-down A to B to C kind of stuff that we all grew up with in schools. But that's why it's a value. It's starting to say what we let go of and what we hold. Single explanation, scientific approach. And then we start embracing the idea of many to many, and narrative might be important. It's not just double-blind case control, but double-blind case control might be important as well. And it's a little bit messy, and multiple truths might be possible, and change might be related to power, and all that stuff comes in, which we know that's how the world works. We just want to make sure that's represented in our evaluations. Next slide, Yulianto. So let's have some fun now. Look at this. I was lucky enough to go to Afghanistan in 2023 with the MHP's Mental Health Project. Head up is the west of Afghanistan near Iran. A little bit difficult to take photos. This was a bit clandestine because waving cameras around in Afghanistan in 23 wasn't necessarily the best life enhancing strategy. But I got a few photos. Okay, next slide. So the case is it's a mental health, it's a community mental health program. It's not a centralized hospital or giving out drugs or anything. It's a community mental health program. I won't explain it in detail, but it involves actually going to people's houses and working with people whose son might be schizophrenic, and working with schools, and working with religious leaders, and working with the local government. And what they wanted to know was, how can thinking and action around mental health change at a community level in a situation with multiple causal factors? And if you think of Afghanistan, pretty much anything that you can think of that may cause mental health disability was there in 2023. There's violence, there's intermarrying, there's unusual gender relationships, there's low resources, there's a geography that's really difficult, there's real rural urban divides, there's difficulty with transport, there's intermittent supply chains, anything you think of, it was there. And what they wanted was a complexity aware, community sensitive, descriptive. They wanted to know what had happened, and causative. They also wanted to know how and why it happened. And it's a project deeply and with values deeply embedded. Next slide, Yulianto. So yeah, as always, I started off and with who am I? What is my role? How could this be relevant? How could I, what can I do that makes an evaluation relevant to all Afghan people? How can I do something that contributes to the local NGO structure as well, not just extract information? And always for me, that value, can it really, what can I do to inform strategy? And so Javed gives me the terms of reference with, next slide, his evaluation questions. And they're from the DAC, the Development Assistance Committee of the European Union. And some of you may know these questions. For me, they're a complete heart sink. There's these questions on relevance. They're all great questions which very clever people have designed, and they apply to all evaluations. How relevant is project design to the priorities and needs of the target group? Were the activities and outputs of the project consistent with the overall goal? And And I think there's 26 of them. There's a lot of them. Next slide, please. There's relevance, and there's effectiveness. I had to put some pictures in there, so dull, these questions. They're all great questions, but they're not causal, they're descriptive, they're methodological, and there's these ones on effectiveness. Many of you have probably seen these questions before. Javed had got them and basically cut and pasted them into the TOR because they're good questions that people much cleverer than him had designed and should be relevant for all evaluations. Next slide. So there's effectiveness, there's relevance, there's effectiveness, there's impact, and there they are. Many more great questions. How effective was the program support to increase support by the government and non-government institutions towards community mental health? Very important question. Next slide, Yulianto. And there's these questions, and there's these questions about efficiency, and yeah, flick on through, Yulianto. We can't spend much on this. Next slide. Sustainability. There's more questions, but wait, there's more. Next slide, Yulianto. Actually, there was a sixth one we somehow lost it. I said to Javed, gosh, that's a lot of questions. And for the word gosh, you could insert any other four-letter word of your choice. No, we can't do that. So what did I say? Next slide. I said, Javed, what is this evaluation really about? You tell me. I love being able to show some of the pictures. Next slide. And here's the values that he identified. He wanted something that was inclusive. He No, I'll say that again. The project is trying to be inclusive. It's trying to include poor people and women, which is a big deal in Afghanistan in 2023. He wanted an evaluation that had made that central. He wanted the project's trying to be equity enhancing. He wanted an evaluation that looked at that. They were really important for them to be. They're pretty much the only significant mental health project in the country. They wanted something that's relevant to the whole country because they hope that they can, well, not them, they're a small organization, but someone could do it somewhere else. They wanted accessible. Shura is the local the lowest level of government of governance. Shura governs about, let's say, 1,000 people. It might be 500. A small village. It's a kind of village governance. Local leaders, but also GOA, Government of Afghanistan. So they wanted it to be accessible. We wanted those organizations to say, yeah, I understand what this is about. This is about us. And they wanted appropriate, being appropriate, respecting local laws and traditions. Complexity aware, we've talked all about that. They totally knew there's not a single linear answer. If we do this, then everyone's going to have great mental health in Afghanistan. We just need to do this. Give everyone Prozac. No, they knew that wasn't the way to go. They knew there's different beliefs and there's religious leaders who say things and there's intermarrying and there's people beating their children and there's all sorts of things going on. They wanted to be learning. They wanted to learn something about how they could contribute to the mental health system of Afghanistan, as well as being, what should we do? And I had inclusive before. The project's inclusive. They also wanted the methods of the evaluation to be inclusive. And they wanted something that enhances the relationship between mental health projects and their own participants. And so we got an evaluation. So that whole thing, I had an iterative conversation, me and Javed, over email, and sometimes we had Zoom meetings with the entire team, and then we iterated. It took about a month. But we defined all that. And then started designing the evaluation after that. And we had an evaluation led by community men and women, double exclamation mark, women working in Afghanistan 2023. We negotiated with the Taliban and they gave us a dispensation. Isn't that fantastic? We got 450 stories. That's pretty decent data. 22 descriptors, 22 attributes to each story. Was the participant poor? Were they medium? What was the education? What ethnic group, etc. 22. But this is a lot of data we got. And we had local people collecting the data, and we had local people and communities sense making it, saying, what the hell does this mean? And the government of Afghanistan came in and said, we want the findings. We want to set up a mental health system based on this. The image on the right is actually out of my database for the evaluation. It's one of the treasures of my life. They uploaded the stories in Dari, locally appropriate. I can't read this. And then in the software we use, they highlighted this. So that's an outcome. That's one of the key things. And we did a lot of work on what they needed to highlight. And then there's, in my database, I can click on that and there's an English translation to that. And on the right is the immersion code tree that developed as we did that. Fantastic process. I totally loved it. Next slide. So we got, has the mental health, this is the questions we came up with. Remember, we had 26 DAC questions. Has the mental health system changed? For whom, how, why? Who's left out? How can they be in? Click. So there's causality in that question. They wanted to know what MHP that should be. What was their contribution, how and why, and that's got causality in it as well. And the what else is what else could we do or should we do, or what else may have helped. So Javed is actually thinking causally. When we said forget about DAC, you tell me what your questions are. He starts, and his values are in here. Next click. They really wanted to do one new project, and so they said, what's important? When you look at everything we've done and what's happened, what's important out of this one, and what isn't? So if we're trying to replicate or trying to do something somewhere else, what's important, especially if it's in a different context, we want the real deep lessons. What's significant to Afghan people, not just as a that may be independent of context. So these are, and next slide, next click. And that's the final question. That's beautiful. I love that as an evaluation question. It gives me the open palette. I can do whatever I want. So what? I can say whatever I want about it. Just give us your evaluative judgment on it. And of course, my evaluative judgment came from the community sense making. Their evaluative judgment is much better than mine. So from 26 non-causal questions, we got 4 values-laden causal questions. Beautiful. And I love doing this evaluation. It was so complex and such a privilege to be in Afghanistan. It was just a wonderful time. And yeah, I said to Javed, 4 values-laden questions in natural language. None of this highfalutin DAC stuff. This is stuff anyone can understand, and I loved it. Next slide. Cool. I think we're right on time, and we haven't got a big group here, Carolina. So I'm going to suggest we don't, rather than break into small groups, let's just do all this in plenary, and Yulianto and I will join you, and we'll just throw some ideas around. Actually, first, no, we'll have a little pause. Everyone individually by yourselves, just thinking about a specific evaluation you've been part of, and think about what we've been saying about values. Where would the values at which stage of this pathway here, from right at the beginning to the all these different decisions that you may have had to be made, where was it possible to put values into that, and did you do it? So we'll give you a few minutes just to think of that yourselves, and then we'll come into a plenary group all together. Carolina, if you can just put us onto participant view when I say it, and then we'll just have a chat about it. We'll just throw some ideas around.
Yep.
Okay, so inclusivity and participation, as just what I was saying before, rigor is about this process of including people. That's what rigor is. It's not about sticking by the books. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for an outcome harvest. That's not going to give you rigor and complexity, but being inclusive may help. It's not the only answer. Next slide. So here's just with this idea of when you include inclusive, every step of the way, and the preparation, defining evaluation questions. Last week we heard about high security prisoners in New Zealand, people who'd killed people and raped people, defining the evaluation questions of a prison rehabilitation program. That's really cool. How can you possibly understand what works on the what it's about unless they tell you? Someone like me almost doesn't understand the world they've come from. What's important to them? Designing, we just had a look at that. We got rid of 26 DAC questions and went into 4 beautiful causal questions, which are all rich in values. Especially, and even so what, the last question, because Javed knew that I've got that values page in my website. Javed knew I'm all about values. It's very nice what you said, Julian. It felt like he trusted me as a person. He said, okay, just tell us whatever else you think might be important. I was like, I love that. The methods in gathering data. So the method was outcome harvesting, but the gathering data, women in Afghanistan in 2023, how could we possibly have a decent evaluation of a so-called equity enhancing program if men can't talk to women in Afghanistan? If we only had men doing the evaluation, we would have got no women's stories in there. As it was, we got, I think it was 46% of all the stories were women. Say, okay, I can stand by this and give this to the funder and say, I think this is a reasonable picture of what's going on there. Since making an analysis, both the prisoners from the last week one, and we had the NGO from the Herat one, but also members of the community. We had a mullah come along and be there. A beautiful moment, and that lovely thing about when these guys are all working. It was the project team working on the stories using the Dedu software, which I showed them how to use. And right then, they were doing that. They took 2 days to analyze all those stories or to code them. And while they were doing that, the Minister of Mental Health of Afghanistan's got a minister just for mental health. And there's not many evaluators from New Zealand come to Afghanistan, so he come from Kabul just to see me. so we did all the usual things of have tea and eat pistachio nuts and all those wonderful things you do. And then we're talking about the evaluation. He said, I want to see this coding stuff going on. So he's actually a psychiatrist. He's a really good guy. Speaks well educated, speaks English, got a beard down to here. And he says, I want to go and see the coding getting done. So, okay, so we go into the room and the whole room freezes. Oh, there's someone from the government here and there's men and women working on it. And he says, no, just sit down. Tell me about it. And they explain the coding to him and show how it works. And it was all, as you saw, it was stories in Dari and Arabic script. And he saw the whole thing. And the team explained to him, and he was the learner, and they were the experts. And he walks out and he says to me, I want you, it says to me and Javed, I want you to figure out a way to run this kind of mental health program for all of Afghanistan, a program that's appropriate for all the people of Afghanistan. And in the context he said that, he's saying, I want you to design a program that works for men and women in Afghanistan. He wasn't Taliban. He was worked under a Taliban government. Isn't that wonderful that he would say that? And that idea of it being relevant to the government of Afghanistan and to a village woman in a village, fantastic. Support the use of findings. Value is very important there. The sad part of the story. So there's almost an open door from the government of Afghanistan. We said we're not big enough to run the whole country, but we'd love to do one other program. We had it all planned, and then I don't know if you remember, there was actually quite a big earthquake in Herat just a few months after we did this, and no one from the NGO died, but everything got destroyed, and the program didn't. Well, it's kind of recovering now, but that lovely opportunity didn't happen. But anyway, the big picture of this is participation is possible at all stages of an evaluation. You down to the next slide. And sense making is being really important. This is a mental health program actually in India, and one of these guys is a community health worker, and the other guy is a chap with schizophrenia. But the term we use, he's an expert by experience in mental health issues in India, and he knows more about mental health issues than anyone else. And the idea that all your participants are actually experts by experience, and let's see if we can get all those experts to help us to understand what the heck's going on. And the ways to kind of do that, starting with causal questions, not what happened, not just saying, oh, what did you do and what happened? It's actually saying, and think of those questions, those 4 questions that Javed came up with. What caused what? How did this happen? What's changed? How did the change happen? Suddenly there's causality embedded in the whole evaluation. We did, when I arrived, we did lots of, we just played around and drew pictures and system diagrams and made our theories about how we think change is happening. And then we said, okay, now we're going to go and test that. Who's going to talk to whom and where and why, and what questions are we going to ask? Which is the next step, facilitate testing of causal claims. So we actually deliberately said, let's have a system map, and then we'll figure out key areas and where there are key arrows in this. Who are the people who would be able to tell us about how those arrows work? Causal probe. Here you're not going to say to someone with mental health disability in India, what made this outcome more likely? But you're going to say, oh yeah, so you started taking your medications. What helped you? Well, what helped you with that? Oh yeah. What was necessary but sufficient? You're not going to say that, but you're going to say, if the free medicines were not there, would you have been able to do it? And he says no. But was that enough? Did you need something else as well as that? And you just translate, but you're translating this stuff into natural language. And that again is why participation is so important. Having people who can understand and talk the natural language of your participants is absolutely critical. And the best people to do that is other participants, but if not, the NGO. People like us should be, kept away from damaging these relationships. And, I wouldn't know how to ask the question in the right way. Rival explanations and counterfactual thinking. If the government hadn't made the medications free, what would have happened? So you'd translate into natural language, but think that way so that you're ready to ask those questions. You're not just doing a preset, and let the conversation flow. So you're not just doing a preset tick box questionnaire. and multiple perspectives. So the Afghanistan one, there's men, there's women, there's kids, there's teachers, there's mullahs, there's NGO workers, there's government workers, there's the doctor from the hospital, there's people from all over the place, and you're trying to figure out this causality from a whole lot of different directions. And the best bottom line of the whole thing is it's flipping great fun. I love doing it. It's so fantastic. You know, I got to cruise around the streets of Afghanistan. Who gets a chance to do that? Okay, next slide, Yulianto. And I think that might be. Okay, so Yulianto's going to, this is the time for your coffee. So we'll give you 5 minutes. I think it's smack on time, right on the hour. Look at that, amazing. I'm so punctual. At 5 past the hour, we'll start again. So go and make yourself a coffee or have a walk outside or say hi to your kids or whatever you need to do. And we'll see you in 5 minutes.
Okay. The next session is using rubrics to strengthen rigor. Rubric is a tool to operationalize values and strengthen rigors. Rubrics itself has long been used in evaluation activities. According to Green, rubrics is a form of qualitative scale that would include criteria, which is the aspects of quality of performance that are of the interest. And then the second one is standards, which is the level of performance or quality for each criterion. For example, like poor, adequate, or good. The third one is descriptors, is descriptions or examples of what each standards look like for each criterion in the rubric. Evaluating with purpose. Rubrics can be used for multiple things. Many people use them to explain methodological choices. Many people also develop rubrics tied to specific content to their study, the implementation strength of a strategy, or the breadth of completeness. In the context of the causal pathways evaluations, we are particularly interested into taking on two critical roles. The first one is rubrics aiding us in making judgments about the strength of our causal claims. For example, how plausible are they? How credible are the sources of the insights? How unique is the contribution of a given cause? Second one, rubrics can aid us in operationalizing our values. For example, how representative was a given method or stage of the study, or how participatory it is. So these are the examples of dimensions of rubric that would help us in exploring the strength of the causal claims. 5 dimensions pick up of the definition of validity said earlier. They also include a note to the importance of inclusive, representative processes. And in other words, the rubrics are designed to explicitly helping our life about values and principles. Now let's unpack these 5 dimensions, and there will be examples for a bit more. Okay, the first one is transparency. Transparency is asking whether the evaluation clearly documents how decisions were made, data were collected, and how conclusions are reached. This supports credibility and accountability. The second one is triangulation. It ensures we are not relying on just one type of source of voice, especially important for making robust causal claims in complex systems. The third one is plausibility. It helps us to judge whether the evidence provides a convincing causal stories, one that is consistent with what we know and what we hear from those closest to the work. Uniqueness, it pushes us to ask what else might explain this. Are we testing our assumptions, or we just reinforcing the assumptions? The fifth one is representativeness. It is about equity. It's about are we hearing from the full range of people affected, especially those whose perspectives are often excluded? So these are the element of inclusiveness that we are trying to see here. What you see in the slide is an example of a rubric related to the strength of causal claim. So this is the example of plausibility. This is what values grounded rubrics like in practice. In the slides, we are focusing on the dimension of plausibility, one of the most central for causal pathways evaluations. We are not just asking, is the evidence good enough? We are instead asking, does the evidence give us a credible, compelling, and coherent story about how change occurred, for whom, and under what conditions? You may notice how each level in the rubric offers a qualitative judgment, not a score. That opens up room for discussion and improvement rather than closing down debate. You can also develop similar rubrics for the other dimensions: triangulation, transparency, uniqueness, and also representativeness. And in a participatory setting, we can also co-create this table with other stakeholders. So the criteria reflect what quality means to them, not just based on us, the evaluators. Rubrics are not something that we create at the end of the project. We use the rubrics throughout the evolution of the process. We might apply a rubric to data segments as we are analyzing them, asking, does this meet our criteria for plausibility? Or have we considered rival explanations? We also use them in a team reflection sessions. Rubrics help us to align our interpretations and see where we might be weighting some types of evidence too heavily or missing key perspectives on some aspects. Most importantly, rubrics can help us to identify areas where our evidence is strong and where it needs work, not to invalidate our findings, but more on the intention of sharpen them. This supports a more honest, values-driven, and actionable evaluation process. And because the criteria are transparent, rubric also build trust with partners. People can see how we are making judgment, and that opens up a space for co-learning and not just reporting. Okay, so we have a quick poll here. Carolina will put up a quick one. So please spend a bit of time to go through the poll. So the question is, which of these three uses of rubric have you tried in your own work? Or evaluation, or probably like something that you would do. Okay, do we have a result? Okay. So we have a quarter of our participants. Rubrics are completely new. And great, some of you have used rubrics in a bit of work, but not within a causal pathways evolution. Okay, awesome. So we can continue with the examples. We still have time. Yep. Okay. Okay. So this is an example of a case study that I did in Indonesia. It's an example of values from a causal pathways evaluation in order to identify contribution to improve curriculum in education sector. The project is funded by the Pakat Foundation in Indonesia. It's a leadership program targeting emerging young leaders to better addressing environmental issues. So our participants, or we call it alumni, have a range variety of work. They are the district government officials, local NGOs officials, and also some journalists. But for this example, is focus mainly on the education program that one of our alumni at the time implementing after the program completion. So the program is the activity is called an ecology-based education program, where our program alumni build, strengthen the capacity and mentoring related stakeholders involved in the development of education curriculum for elementary, junior high, and high school level. The study purpose is to understand how change occurred and what were their contribution. When we developing the rubric to understand the outcomes and the values of the study, we develop through consultations with the program implementer and the alumni, the district office officials, and also teachers, and those who were assigned to develop the curriculum. Participants and also the counterparts having this discussion to be able to understand the value of developing rubric, as they have a say on what the evidence would look like and correlate them with the intervention that they had at the time. So if you look at this is one example of the triangulation rubric. From 5 columns, when we applying the rubrics to our case study, we somehow like simplified a little bit into these 3 columns. So for them to be able to easily understand the value and the outcomes using the rubric, we simplified the assessment using only 3 scoring points. The first one, the lowest, would be the lack of evidence that corroborates the connection between the intervention and outcome. That make it difficult to narrate the outcomes, the story of change or the behavior change. Second one in the middle is somewhat identified evidence. Somewhat identified evidence corroborates the connection between intervention and the outcomes. Those links connects between evidence to intervention to outcomes still unclear, but needs to explore more. So this is some kind of in the middle ground. The third one is defined as a clearly identified evidence corroborates the connection between intervention and outcomes. The outcome statement clearly connects intervention to the outcome. So when we discussing the rubric and how we come to like the result of the work come to this like what in the result is coming to the highest score, number 3. The discussion with the partner is using this kind of what is it called? This kind of schematic. I'm sorry, this is in Indonesian language, but basically when we discussing the rubric, we took a bit of outcome harvesting approach, where and if you look at the left side of the slide is how we make a change narrative, the story of change, and we look at this narrative and see when those changes will happen and how was the milestone of the changes and what was the significance of the changes, who contributed to these changes, and if there is any unintended outcome occurred as a result of the intervention. So when the team and the counterparts, the teachers, district official, district education office discussing this, the rubrics, we're using this outcome harvesting approach as reference, and then we come up with an agreement that we can verify the changes that happen in the district that would improve the quality of the curriculum. And also the curriculum was containing about some ecological based knowledge where the children can also not just improving the knowledge on specific areas on ecology development, but also able to understand the value to conserve environment in their daily life, not just at school, but also in their neighborhood. Okay, next one is we would like to hear your experience, how this applies to your work. As Jeff mentioned earlier, this is, I think, still a small group. Let me see number of participants. Wait, hold on. So we have like 5 or 6. So instead of making a breakout room, Jeff and Carolina, I think we can also use the same method earlier. Please put your comments in the chat, or if you would like to share your experience using rubrics, because I think like most of the participant at some point have used rubric, but not in the context of as a causal pathways evaluation. Okay, I keep like you still have time, so probably 3 to 5 minutes for your personal reflection, and then you can put in your comment in the chat or raise your hand and open the microphone. Okay, so I'll give it back to you. Yeah.
We're towards the end, but we'll have a time for, or it's the times now. But your question, Julian, made me think, what is a rubric? It's a structured way of looking and thinking. And so incredibly useful thing to do for causality, but also, you know, for other things. So this is, in terms of content today, we've done it. So let's just review what we said. We said, let's rethink rigor. Rigor is not, it's not about methodology. It's about content and process. Does the content include values? Does it include complexity? Does it, you know, all the things we talked about? It's what you put in. That's what makes it a rigorous evaluation. And process, particularly participation. Have you been participatory? That's going to make a rigorous causal evaluation much more than did I stick to the exact steps of an outcome harvest as prescribed by Picard or Wilson Grau. You don't have to do that, but you do have to have multiple sources and triangulate your information. And that's what a rigorous causal evaluation is, with, you know, all that stuff. We looked at values, why they're important and how you put them in, and we looked at rigor, and we said those are, well, we gave you 3 examples of what we think are core values, but we said the key thing is to have that interaction with your with the participant in your evaluation, with the project, with the change agent, to say, what do you want? What do you think should be in this evaluation? And they'll have values. Everyone has values. And then we said make sure, yeah, find a methodology that gets them in, or bricolage one up for yourselves. And then we said rubrics. Rubrics is a structured way of looking and thinking, and it adds rigor by being structured, forcing you to say, how good is this? How strong is that evidence? And give yourself for qualitative data, which we use, it gives you a structured way of assessing it. Those are not the only 2 things about, to increase rigor in a causal pathway evaluation, but they're both very, very important. So that's a brief summary of today. We've got this idea here. As you reflect on today's content, what's one thing you can act on in the next 3 months? And here are some ideas. There may be something else out there. So we're just going to have one of those awkward pauses, and we'll give you only 3 minutes, but see if you can write something down. And if anyone is brave enough to share it, throw it in the chat, but you don't have to. But see if you can write something down for yourself, because there's no point really doing a webinar if you say, oh, that was interesting, but it doesn't change anything about what you do later on. So 3 minutes pause. And if anyone who's really brave, throw it in the chat. For me, quite a big thing for any training or any course I ever do is to say, can I share this with my organization? So sharing with a colleague, but yeah, what about going back and figuring it out and doing a 1-hour session on causal pathways with the organization you come from? Those kind of ideas. Thank you. Is that
We have one in the chat.
applying rigor to multiple data sources
Okay.
during analysis. Are you brave enough to unmute yourself and just talk us through how you're thinking there?
Yes. Okay. Like, let's say partially involved in an evaluation, and what I think I can do with what I've learned today is to use multiple sources and then use multiple data sources to answer a question, and then see if I can come up with that structural framework, the rigor, to see how plausible, the analysis is, for each of the question, for each of the criteria of the question. So if I have a question and I have the multiple data sources to pull or to analyze, then I should be able to use a framework with what I've learned, to actually determine the plausibility of that, and of that analysis, of the claims that I am actually making. So I think that will help me improve on the triangulation, and I think substantially it will make me get a little bit nearer to causal understanding more about the causal pathways.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. And I think if you do that, there's some other benefits you'll get. It will completely. It's also going to change your relationship with your participants, because as you include more and more people in their views, they feel, this is my project. So it increases the ownership. And at least for me, Kafayat, it's a hang of a lot of fun using lots of people. Jerian, you've got a whole lot. Are you brave enough to talk us through any of these?
I left the third point. That's good.
Which one you like?
The third point is very brave, like Jeff mentioned.
Oh, yes. Well, basically, I get to decide what the meal budget for the next 5 years looks like, and I'm writing it up now. And to be honest, I think it's way too early. I've only started my role since May, so I'm really needing more time actually to listen, but to our teams and what's actually needed. But therefore, I get a huge say on how that looks like. So I think putting aside budget to do this, I think, is a key one, right? And I get to have a say in that. And it's also like I know the DAC criteria really well. That's kind of what I've been worked with, but I'm also in a beautiful situation where our organization doesn't really work project-based. They don't really have the external funders that require a DAC-based framework for evaluating. So therefore, I think I want to have a conversation with regional directors as well, and be really, really critical before also introducing that way of thinking, if it could also be the alternative, right? I think the questions you presented, Jeff, in your example in Afghanistan, I think that is much more aligned with, I think, where our teams are at in terms of even how they think, and rather than trying to force it into sort of DAC criteria framework, if that doesn't have to be the case. Because we already agreed there will be little evaluations in each of the different regions in the next year or so, and those topics are determined by those teams themselves. But using a causal pathways thinking rather than trying to force that into a DAC mold, I think will be really useful.
Thank you so much. That's really really cool. And while you were talking, I thought actually that whole thing about DAC is, DAC, they're all great questions. They just were, in my example, they were not Javid's questions. In your example, they may not be the questions of your partners. And there's philosophy rolled up in that. How do we see ourselves? Are we external people who come and apply a preset, criteria, and we're ticking off, is it relevant? Is it effective? Is that our role? They're all good questions. Or is our role to, is that what an evaluator does? Apply an external standard to a project? Or does an evaluator communicate with a project and get them to ask their own questions and tell us how they think they're going? I think there's a philosophy of how we see ourselves wrapped up in that. And it's certainly in terms of my practice, it's been much more fun since I've been brave enough to tell even the European Union, actually, could we renegotiate these questions? It's my life's way more fun. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else brave enough to share? You don't have to.
But I think Jerian's experience is similar to myself, Jeff, because I recently joined a new project, Jerian, in Indonesia. And right after this workshop, I will have to take a 1 hour train to the city to facilitate discussion about criminal justice reform. And like I mentioned to you, Jeff, we were going to discuss about prison overcrowd. And while discussing the causal mapping about how the logic model of the intervention would look like, I in that room will have to starting to think about the causal pathways evaluations, how probably use rubrics as part of how the team can evaluate, assess the results of the intervention. So it's interesting.
Cool. Thank you.
So we continue on. We only have a few more slides, Jeff.
Yeah,
continue.
let's continue. Give us the next slide, Yulianto.
Yep. All right.
Okay, so we're doing this fun thing. Here's some ideas. If this stuff excites you, it really does excite me. Here's some ideas of how to take it further. There's always a presentation on causal pathways at the American Evaluation Association conference, and there'll be presentations at other regional conferences. I'm probably going to do one at the next Australasian one. There's the European Evaluation Association, but also the Causal Pathways team is available to attend other events by request. And so there's a contact on the website. And if there's an event or a small conference, or and it may be done virtually or in person, depending on where it is and the timing. But if it's something you want to take further, everyone who's in the team is really excited about it. So we're looking for opportunities. And there's also the possibility, if you'd really like it, you probably need to be a reasonable size organization, but you could again contact the Causal Pathways team from the website, and you could get a bespoke training for your organization. What is Causal Pathways? How do you think? How do you do it? How do you plan one? The whole thing. So that's presentations and trainings. There are a whole lot of resources. There's on the Causal Pathways website itself, there's case studies and there's also a link to the book chapter recently written, but there's also betterevaluation.com, which probably many of us look at anyway, has got a resource hub, and find the Causal Pathway tab on that. There's a whole lot of resources, including cases and theory. And finally, one of the things which I find very exciting is every now and then organizations contact us and say, could some of you, we've got this highfalutin names, the Brains Trust. Any one or two or three of us who feel excited about something, an organization may put in a request for something specific. Could you help us unravel the causal chain in this particular piece of work we're trying to do? And so we're really, I was going to say available, but we're really excited about that. That's such fun to do those kind of things. So consider Causal Pathways, or consider this webinar as a start of a journey. And there's a whole lot more. There's mountains and mountains and mountains beyond to travel through. And that's the website at the bottom of the page there. And Carolina is our contact person. And a big shout out to you, Carolina. Carolina quietly sits in the background and organizes all this stuff that makes our messy slides beautiful, and does the polls for us and does everything. So thank you very much. That's Carolina. And yeah, next slide, Giulianto. Okay, so there's just an example of there's articles and there's resources that you can find. It's not something that's just a tiny idea and there's nowhere else to go with it. There's lots of stuff out there. Carolina yet again has done something for us. We'd love you to fill in this poll. It's very quick, but it does help us to know how this training is and what we could do better and what works and what doesn't. So if you could quickly fill in that poll, that would be wonderful. And Julianto, if you could give us the next slide.
That's a thank
And
you.
that's it. But I'm totally happy for any of you if you want to contact me and just have a yarn about stuff, or you're very welcome to. My email is just my name with no dots or dashes at Gmail, jeffmathias@gmail.com.
And we're going to send this presentation and the recording to all participants. Yeah.